If you know someone that still doesn't believe the U.S. middle class is falling apart, show them this video because by the end of it, they'll probably have a different opinion. Or they'll double down and insist that everything is fine and those struggling are just lazy, which, you know what? Let them. Let them die on that hill of ignorance so high up they need oxygen tanks like Everest climbers. The trends eviscerating the middle class have accelerated in recent years. It's like someone saw how hard it was to be middle class in the late 90s and thought, how can we make this worse? And then instead of abandoning that idea, they just did it. The percentage of middle class jobs has shrunk. Why have one livable wage job when you can have three that don't? While the wealth of the typical American household has fallen, homes are still the main asset class for American families, but home ownership rates have declined as costs have exploded. All of this adds up to millions of middle-class households struggling with rising costs, yet the decline of the U.S. middle class is a crisis we're not properly addressing. Without further ado, here are 30 stats to show anyone who doubts the middle class is being destroyed. A recent Gallup poll found that between May 2021 and May 2022, there was a 10% decline in middle-class Americans rating their financial situation as good or satisfactory. That's a big drop in just 1 year. What happened during that time, you might ask? Well, a lot of things actually, none of them good. Let's dive in a little deeper, shall we? A report by Wells Fargo shows middle-income Americans are feeling the impact of rising living expenses. They're spiraling into an existential crisis every time they buy groceries. It's like chickens are unionizing and demanding six-figure salaries. Everything is so expensive. A Wells Fargo report found 40% of middle-class Americans are worried about not having enough money to pay monthly bills. They lie awake at night running the numbers in their head, and it's not looking good. Debt, the gift that keeps on taking. In May, 11% of middle-class Americans said they're likely to miss a debt payment over the next 3 months, Federal Reserve data showed. Imagine how many more are quietly drowning in debt, too ashamed to say anything. Inflation, the silent killer of middle-class dreams. Inflation has squeezed the middle class for decades, but official numbers don't tell the whole story. They say, oh, inflation is only up 2%. Meanwhile, the price of everything we need has doubled, tripled, or even quadrupled. Rents so high, we'll be living in the metaverse soon. Between 2001 and 2020, rents shot up by 150%, while the official measure of housing costs only grew by 54%. Who are they trying to kid? Have they seen the rental market lately? It's insane. Remember when middle-class families could afford to buy a home? Pepperidge Farm remembers, but those days are long gone. Today, middle-class households with median incomes of $100,000 can only buy homes in 36% of markets. In 2001, a two-income middle-class family had on average $4,000 extra to spend after covering their basic needs. Today, that same family would go $2,000 into debt to sustain a modest lifestyle. That's a $6,000 swing. What the hell happened? According to a Conference Board survey, just under 2/3 of middle-class workers worry their pay won't keep up with inflation this year, and frankly, they should be worried, because it's not. Wages have been stagnant for decades, while costs have skyrocketed. It's a recipe for disaster. Losing the salary race against inflation. A CNBC and Momentive survey found 66% of American workers say inflation outpaced salary gains in the past year. It's like trying to outrun a cheetah on a unicycle. It's just not going to happen. Economic pessimism. It's not just you. Economic pessimism is growing in the U.S. with Gallup's Economic Confidence Index at -45 last month. That's like, I'm so pessimistic I'm wearing a black turtleneck in July levels of pessimism. Worse off than last year, a common refrain. 38% of middle-class workers said they're worse off financially in April 2022 than last year. The rising cost of everything, a middle-class nightmare. The rising cost of living seems to be the main reason why middle-class workers are feeling financially worse off. It's just a harsh fact of life at this point. Underpaid and overworked, the American dream. 28% of American workers say they are not well paid, an all-time high according to a recent survey by CNBC. Ready to quit. The Great Resignation continues. 39% of U.S. workers have seriously considered quitting their jobs in the past 3 months. It's not a good sign. 93% of respondents to a May survey by Pew Research felt inflation was a very big problem for the country in 2022. It's a universally acknowledged truth. Skyrocketing prices of fuel, food, and housing are disconcerting to Americans living paycheck to paycheck. Even rich people are living paycheck to paycheck, with over 1/3 of them earning at least $250,000 a year. If you're making $250,000 a year and still living paycheck to paycheck, you need to fire your financial advisor. According to the National Institute on Retirement Security, 62% of middle-class Americans are worried about not having enough for retirement. Retirement is expensive, especially if you want to do anything fun like, leave the house or travel. A report from the National Institute on Retirement Security found tax breaks for retirement savings benefit high-income households. 34.6% of all income growth over the past 3 decades has gone to the top 1/10 of 1% of all earners. It's like they're playing Monopoly and they've replaced all the properties with hotels, and they're just going around collecting rent from everyone else, making it harder for others to get by. The bottom 90% of earners have seen only 15.9% of income growth. It's like they're at Monopoly, stuck in jail, unable to get out. Over the past 10 years, the richest 5% of Americans saw their median wealth increase by 88%. It's like they're playing a video game on easy mode while we're stuck on the hardest difficulty setting, struggling to keep up. A new Federal Reserve Bank of New York report has warned that the middle-class consumer base, which historically powered America's economy, is rapidly eroding. It's not good at all. A high school diploma, no longer a guaranteed ticket to the middle class. In the 1960s, almost all prime-age men with a high school diploma were working. Today, it's just 85%. A high school diploma used to get you a good-paying job and support a family. Now, it's barely enough to qualify you for a job at Starbucks. Student loan debt crushing the middle class. Middle-class Americans hold 60% of public student loan debt. We're told to go to college for a good job, but we graduate with so much debt we can't buy a house, start a family, or even go out to eat without guilt. The high cost of raising a family, a middle-class dilemma. Raising a child from birth to 17 in a middle-class family costs almost $286,000. It's like having a luxury car you can't drive because you're too busy working to pay off the loan. Child poverty, a national disgrace. Over 12 million children in the U.S. live in poverty. No child deserves this. It's a stain on our national conscience. 1 in 6, the stark reality of child poverty. 1 in 6 children in the United States lives in poverty in 2022. We're the richest country in the world. We can do better. Homeless children, a symptom of a broken system. If the middle class was thriving, we wouldn't have 1.3 million homeless public school children. It's a national tragedy. Every child deserves a stable home. Look, I'm not an economist, but I can tell you this. Many families are facing financial hardships right now. Without the middle class, America loses its foundation. As this group gets smaller, poverty spreads across the nation like mold, and no amount of bleach can fix that.